Welcome, everyone. I am Dr. Bharti Kansara, Vice President of American Friends of SOAS. And despite the somewhat esoteric nature of the talk today by Eric Villalobos on the Yati semi-renunciant monks of the Śvetāmbara Jaina tradition, we have had an overwhelming response with more than 100 people signing up for this webinar, which is truly wonderful. Eric Villalobos is, of course, the recipient of the 2020 to 2021 John Loiello Scholarship, which is the main fundraising goal of American Friends of SOAS. And he will be starting his master's degree in SOAS this fall. A few weeks ago, Eric emailed me and asked me if this was going to be primarily a discussion between himself and Professor Peter Flügel, the very distinguished chair of the Centre of Jaina Studies at SOAS. Or would I like a slideshow from his research in India earlier this year? Or would I like some stories from his notebook from the field with photos? Or would I like an elaboration of the wider implications of his research? Or would I like the story of a young Latino from Southern California who became fascinated with the study of Jainism? And I said, Eric, this is amazing, and I want all of the above. So we are in for a real treat today. Now, before Eric talks, Professor Peter Flügel will give us an insight into the uniqueness of the Centre of Jaina Studies at SOAS. And then he will tell us how important it is to bring young and talented scholars like Eric into this field. And then after Eric's talk, there will be a discussion between Professor Flügel and Eric, followed by a general Q&A from the audience. So as you listen to Eric's talk, please put your questions into the chat box, and then Professor Flügel will read them out at the end. And in conclusion, we will have a vote of thanks from our terrific president of American Friends of SOAS, Greg Bowie, who just wants to say hi before we get started.
Hi, everyone. Yes, thank you so much for joining us. We've been really looking forward to this talk. And I know we have a great presentation ahead of us, so I'll let you guys take it over.
Right, I think now it's my turn. I'm Peter Flügel, and I'm currently the chair of the Centre of Jaina Studies at SOAS. You probably don't know anything about Jainism and nothing about the Centre of Jaina Studies at SOAS, except those, of course, of you who studied recently here. We started this in 2004, so the center is now going for 16 years. I've been teaching at SOAS Jainism, which was my PhD topic. I traveled, to India as one did in the 70s, and got excited about the Jain temples and the monks and so on, who I saw and I met. Absolutely fascinating, so that motivated me. And somehow I ended up in London and UK and SOAS, and we started teaching a few courses on part-time salaries, and then the idea emerged to found a center. Why is this necessary? Because Jaina studies is a minority field, and people do not have set career paths, at least not now. Although in America there are very positive developments, which Eric can probably explain better. People are working in mathematics, in, of course, Sanskrit, history, art, and so on, and are fairly isolated as far as Jain studies is concerned. So in order to consolidate this field and bring people together on an interdisciplinary platform, we created this center, which is cross departments at SOAS. There are similar centers here, of course, a Center of Buddhist Studies and Japanese religions and so on. So we more or less copied the format. And ever since we started, it took off, I must say, without any significant funding up to today, which is quite an achievement. But we had supporters from the local Jain community who helped us out in moments of need. So we're very grateful for their support, which is absolutely essential. And there are very few scholars specializing in this field. As you can imagine, to do a PhD in an esoteric field like this, which doesn't fill huge classes, which is a minority, very specialized subject, is quite a commitment. So I was more than delighted to meet Eric by chance, more or less. I think he sent me an email, and we happened to be both in Delhi last December, and spontaneously we decided to meet. And he told me about his project. I was extremely impressed. I mean, you have to realize when you listen to him, he has not even studied Jainism as such, I believe. Please correct me, Eric. And hasn't even studied his MA, but already undertaken almost a year of research. And what he told me of his findings was absolutely stunning. I mean, I've never heard of this. I've worked in the field for 30 years. And so I was instantly delighted to see a person with such skills and dedication being interested in this field. So I believe in your organization, it will probably be the first talk on Jainism, therefore very interesting for all participants. And I look forward to it. I would like to request Eric to say a few words about his interest in Jainism and show us his presentation.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Flügel. And you're right. Yeah, I hadn't taken any formal classes in Jain studies, but I did manage to take a few graduate seminars as an undergrad and kind of force them to be about Jainism. So I've written some term papers on Jain Mahabharat, Jain Bhakti, Jain Tantra, and things like that. Yeah, I was asked to talk a little bit about why am I interested in Jainism. So I'll give that little story before I begin my presentation. I knew that I wanted to study religion since before entering college, before entering my undergrad. And at first, I wanted to study kind of everything. And I figured, okay, that's probably not a realistic goal, at least not one to do very well. So I opted for South Asia. And so in the US, at least, at your average bookstore, you'll find books on maybe some Buddhist missionary books, or you'll find stories from Hinduism. And I read all that, and I thought, okay, maybe I should start going a little deeper now. So then I started reading a bit about Jainism, and I was really, really fascinated with it because it is it's very similar in the themes that I saw from what I had read about Buddhism, from what I had read about Hinduism, but it's its own unique world. And more than that, as I'm sure you probably know, it's a very understudied world. So you have all these, this fascinating research that's done in the realm of Jain studies. And then there's always this statement that, well, that's all we know because not much research has been done. And really, like, all academics say that about their field, but in the field of Jain studies, like, you really feel it, that there's so much space to expand into. So from there, I guess I'll start my presentation, if that's all right with you. Yeah, so give me a second. Let me just screen share. And do confirm for me, Dr. Flügel, that you can see everything all right?
Yes.
Can you see my presentation now?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Let me just screen that. All right, so let's begin. So before I get into the bulk of my presentation, which is about my fieldwork in India over the past year or so, I wanted to answer some three basic questions, just so that if there are any newcomers to the tradition or to the subject, that they would you know, kind of be on the same page and at least have some background context. So the first of these, let's just get straight into it. What is Jainism? So Jainism is a 2,600-year-old religious tradition founded in one sense by Lord Mahavira. Mahavira is the 24th in a series of Tirthankars, or ford makers, who establish and re-establish the Jain Dharma. And the central principle of the Jain Dharma is ahimsa, or non-harm, or non-violence. And it's from ahimsa that Jains derive probably their most, the most famous aspect of Jainism, which is their strict vegetarianism. And Jain vegetarianism prohibits not only the consumption of meat and fish and honey, but also of root vegetables, like potatoes, carrots, radishes, onion, garlic, things like that. The second thing that Jains would probably be most famous for would be their monasticism. So we can ask, what are Jain monks or Jain sadhus like? Well, they're divided into two major sectarian groups, the first of which is the Digambars, which their name means the sky-clad. They are wearing the sky, or they are nude. The second group is the group that we're going to be dealing with mostly today, which are the Sritamburs. And their name means the white-clad, referring to the fact that their monks wear white robes. Now, there are many differences between these two groups and even within these groups, but all monks, all Jain monks, adhere, at least in some form, to what are called the 5 major vows, which are as follows in this rendition: cessation from violence, from untruth, from stealing, from unchastity, and then from seizing or attachment to property or material wealth. So all Jains, in some sense, are supposed to follow these principles to a certain degree, but Jain monks are venerated in the Jain community precisely because they follow these principles to their strictest degree. And from there, we can use these 5 vows to kind of place the Jain Yatis in the Jain social and, I guess, monastic order. So we can ask, who are the Jain Yatis? So Jain Yatis are a special class of semi-renunciant monks who, in Śvetāmbara Jainism, are not obligated to strictly follow the Jain monastic code. And you can see that visually again with this figure right here. You can see his robes are a little bit more ornate, just a little bit, than the sort of archetypal Śvetāmbara sadhu that you saw in the previous slide. And you can also see that in the way that they do their hair. So Jain monks, every so often, are obligated to ritually tear out their hair as a sort of statement in their commitment to non-attachment to material reality. But Yatis, since they are semi-renouncers in one sense, are still part, at least partially, of the, of the material world. And so you often see them, not always, but you can very commonly see them with these mustaches. But what would be more fruitful is, again, to view them through the lens of these 5 vows. So let's just go through them right now. So you have violence. Jain monks are not allowed to travel by mechanized transport. And the reason for that is, well, for example, if a Jain monk were to travel by airplane, then they would be liable for all the violence that takes place on the flight. So if the airplane, unfortunately hit a bird, or every, insect that hits the window, they are karmically liable for that violence. But Yatis, on the other hand, I mean, they're still liable, but they haven't taken the vow to forego this violence to the extent that the fully renouncing, or quote unquote fully renouncing monks have done. So let's skip ahead here to unchastity. Some, but not all Yatis were known to have wives, to take concubines, to have children sometimes, which would be unthinkable for an orthoprax Jain monk to do. And then finally, you have the seizing or attachment to property or material wealth. So first, Yatis are allowed to handle money. They are allowed to own property. Many of them own houses and buildings and things like that. And they are allowed to oversee and manage property to a greater extent than what would technically be allowed to an upright orthoprax Jain sadhu. But more than that, they're allowed to partake in what you could call, I guess, occult sciences like astrology, in mantra making, in tantra, in Ayurvedic medical practices that afford them and their followers a certain degree of material benefit. So in that sense, they are semi-renouncers, as I used in the title. But I do want to push against this a little bit, because while they are, in this sense, semi-renouncers, it should be remembered that for a very, very long time, up until the last 100 years or so, after they were formed out of almost to the point of extinction, out of the Jain monastic system, for a very long time, Yatis were the dominant monastic class in Śvetāmbara Jainism. So your average Śvetāmbara Jain layperson, in the early modern period, we can just say roughly, if they were to have some connection to the Jain monastic order, it was very likely to be their local Yati. So how did this system actually work before these reforms happened, or started to happen about 100 years ago? Well, you would have these Jain monastic orders called gachas that were mostly comprised of Yatis, or sometimes, in some cases, they were exclusively comprised of Yatis. And at the top of the monastic order were these figures called Sripujas, the leaders of the Jain monastic orders. They're called Sripujas. And so this figure right here, he's actually not just any ordinary Yati, he is a Sripuja. So that's part of the reason why he's, it's a little fancier background. And these Sripujas would sit on what are called gadis, or thrones, and they would oversee these vast networks of Yatis that extended across the entire subcontinent. It extended from some of them extended from the east coast of India to the west coast. In that sense, Yatis were this dominant monastic class for a significant period of time until they were formed out of the Jain monastic order. But at the same time, I don't want you to think that there aren't still Yatis left, because there are, and two, that even though there are very few Yatis left, and most of these gadis are now empty, if they haven't been taken down at all, they function more as shrines nowadays. But even still, there are still some Yatis who have some degree of influence and power and prestige. So let's look at a few. Here is Yati Kumar Vijay from Jodhpur in Rajasthan, and he is a YouTube astrologer Yati who does weekly and monthly horoscopes and forecasts. And his YouTube channel has, as of today, about 450,000 subscribers, which is quite a bit. Next, we have His Holiness Dr. Vasant Vijay Ji Maharaj. He's a Yati from Krishnagiri, Tamil Nadu. And here he is at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago. And a little fun fact about him, he's actually the first monk of any kind that I met and I met him in Salt Lake City, Utah. So you can kind of see, or you can begin to see how, you know, in a globalized world, where you have a Jain diaspora that's outside of India, in other parts of Asia, in Europe, in North America, in the UK, Jain Yatis and other types of semi-renouncers who can travel have an important role to play in connecting the Jain community to the monastic order. And this is also the case historically when Jain merchants were shifting and building new communities in different parts of India. And we'll see an example of that later in the presentation. And then finally, just a quick example, not the best picture, but here is Yati the Jason from Magarwada in Gujarat. He's at his gadi at a big public ceremony with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So with that in mind, let's move on to the kind of the bulk of the presentation, which is on my field work. And so I do want to emphasize at this point that this is an ongoing project. So a lot of things that I'm going to show you are simply what's been reported to me, and well, I need to confirm and do further research and so on and so forth. But in the meantime, I thought it would be good to kind of show you what the Yati tradition now looks like through some examples. So we're going to follow what is called the Rangasuri Shaka. It's a sub-branch of the Katargach, and it's based in Lucknow, right here. So we're going to go there right now. You go to the Chintamani Prashanat Jain Mandir in Lucknow, and here's the gati. It's right there. Behind it, you have a small temple. It's in a small alleyway. Some really gorgeous Jain paintings, some bronze work, some marble. Here is the second to last Sri Puja of the Rangasuri Shaka, Jain Ratnasuri. And here is his Samadhi stone, where he was cremated after he died. Now, this lineage is extinct. And even though it was very powerful at one point, as far as I can tell with the Samadhi stone, you can't, there's nothing labeling it. There was no signs of it being worshipped or venerated or honored in any way. In fact, the only reason why I found out about it was sort of these older members of the Jain Association said, oh, you need to check out this thing right here. And there wouldn't have been much to show you about the Rangasuri Shaka. But then I found out about this legal battle, and I got some documents from this court case that occurs at the end of the Rangasuri Shaka when it finally went extinct. So it centers around the final Sri Puja, Sri Vijay Suri. And what happened was that he abandoned his post. He ran off to Himachal Pradesh. He got married, and then he tried to sell off portions of temple property for his own personal benefit. At least that's what was alleged in the suit. And the reason why I want to show you these documents is not just because this is kind of a dramatic scandal or anything like that, but the central point, the central issue at hand in the legal battle was, how does a gadi work? So Vijay Suri, he argued in his defense that a gadi is simply where a Sri Puja preaches. And because he had never formally renounced his title as a Sri Puja, and even though he had gotten married, that's not very strange for a Yati to do. So in that sense, he was still Sri Puja, and so his new gadi was his new home in Himachal Pradesh. So then he, from there, he actually lost the suit. The court did not agree with him. But it is quite interesting to see kind of how he argued, how exactly does a gadi work, and that he was still technically Sri Puja. So he has since passed away, and that was the last Sri Puja of this monastic lineage. But like I said, it was a very powerful, very widespread lineage in the Katargach of Śvetāmbara Jainism. Where you can see other impacts of the Rangasuri Shaka is in Jaipur. So let's go to Jofri Bazaar in Jaipur. There's actually two branches here. One is the Ransuri Shaka, which we just went over, and the second is the Mandovara Shaka, which is based itself in Jaipur. So we're going to look at both, but let's continue with the Ransuri Shaka. So here's the outside of the temple. Here's the gadi, the secondary gadi, and you have some tile work, you have some images, you have some textiles and so forth. You even have these murtis. What's interesting about this is that even though the Ransuri Shaka has essentially gone extinct, it was very closely associated with the Srimal Jain community, which owns this temple where this gadi is located. And they have an annual event where they honor the founder of the Ransuri Shaka, whose name was Ransuri. And so, yeah, in a certain sense, the tradition or the honor and respect is still ongoing. And you can see here the shrine, which the picture of which is the cover photo for this event. It is a shrine to the lineage, the monastic lineage of Jainism, starting with Mahavira, going down the line through the founders of the Katargach, and then to the founders of the Ransuri Shaka, and then to subsequent Sri Pujas. And you can see that it's still being venerated. You see some sandalwood paste on all the footprints. You see flowers. And actually, to enter the sanctum where this shrine is located, you have to take a ritual bath and other ritual procedures. So I actually didn't take this picture on my own. I actually had a friend do it for me. But the other place where you can see a shaka, and this one was based in Jaipur itself, is the Mandovara Shaka, and they were located pretty close to each other. So here it is, and it's really a gorgeous place. You have tons of murtis and portraits, and you can see the entire lineage of the Mandovara Shaka, from its founder, Jain Mahendra Suri. Here's a portrait of him. To different Sri Pujas throughout the ages, and you can kind of see how they look like. All the way down to the last Sri Puja, Jain Dhanendra Suri, and the last Yati. This is not a Sri Puja; he's a Yeti. So yes, this is the last Yati of this lineage. And the reason why I wanted to bring this lineage up is because they were based in Jaipur, which is in Rajasthan, but they had a sub-branch in Benares, which is on the completely other side of the country. So I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of how large these networks can get. So from there, let's take a trip all the way to the other side of the country, not to Benares, but to Kolkata. So here we are in Kolkata in West Bengal. Here is again another Ransuri Shaka Gadi. It's a bit simple, more simple than the other ones, but it's still maintained and honored and venerated. And it's not the only place where you can see the historic impact of the Ransuri Shaka. The other place that you can do that is at this very famous temple, sometimes called Parasnap Temple. Really gorgeous. It was founded by this very wealthy Jain merchant who imported some European-style statues and tile work and columns and things like that from, I believe, Italy and Belgium. But what is less, it's a really big pilgrimage site and it's a really big tourist site, and I also recommend that you go because it's a really amazing place. But it was actually consecrated by a Sri Puja. And I had the honor and pleasure of being led around the temple grounds and given a personal tour by the great-grandson of the founder of the temple. And I actually met many members of the family and of the wider community, where you could get a sense of the historical impact that Yatis had on the community. So we're going to look at just two quotes. The first is from the great-grandson that I just showed you. So he says, due to these Yatis, we are able to remain Jains. We would have converted to another religion because it was difficult for the sadhus to come to Kolkata. They were the source of inspiration to be a Jain, and that's why we are Jains now. We are very much grateful to the Yatis, and we still respect them and believe in them. And so you can kind of see the impact and the historical importance that Yatis and their ability to travel as they please, their ability to join merchants and other groups on trips that required, mechanized travel to get to their destination. And you can see a sense of reverence and respect. A slightly different attitude is kind of displayed by this other quote from a different person in the community. And he says, Yatis are pious and honorable, yes, but they are not real sadhus. To not recognize this is a disservice to the real sadhus. And we had a bit of a conversation, and then I brought up the fact that Sri Pujas would often call themselves acharyas, which is one of the highest rankings you can get in the Jain monastic order. So he had this to say: they are calling themselves captain of the team, but they are not even team players, or they're not even players. So you can see these really different attitudes that come from this community that has been historically impacted by the Yati tradition. But where you can also see in Kolkata a modern impact, and to do that, you have to go right outside on the outskirts of Kolkata, when it starts to become a little more jungly, a little more rural, to this Satya Sadhna meditation center, which was built by this person right here, Sri Puja Sri Jimchandra Suriji. He is the last living Sri Puja in Śvetāmbara Jainism. After 100 or so years of reform that eliminated the Yeti and Sri Puja system, his lineage is the last to survive of this older system. And he actually still, he initiates new disciples to this day. That one initiation ceremony was actually disrupted by coronavirus. So I don't know if it ended up taking place, but here is one of his disciples, Yati Sri Amrit Sundarji. And together they promote this body of meditative practices called the Satya Sadhna, where you go on these meditation retreats. Here's the meditation center in or outside of Kolkata, but his main center is in Nal, where he has his main gadi. Nal is near Bikaner in Rajasthan, again on the other side of the country. So these pictures are not of that. I didn't take these pictures. These are from the temple website. But you go on these meditation retreats, some of which are 30 days, some of which are 7 days. But generally, you follow these 5 precepts, which might be a little familiar to you from the beginning of the presentation. 1, follow the truth. Abstain from killing. Never steal. Abstain from sexual misconduct. And finally, here's the twist: donate for the promotion of the Satya Sadhna. So how does it actually work? The standard, like I said, there are many different types of meditation retreats, but the standard is the 10-day Satya Sadhna meditation retreat, where you're completely disconnected from the outside world. You wake up at 4:30 and you start meditating according to this schedule. So days 1 through 3, you practice what is called flash darshan, where you focus your concentration on your breathing. And you focus on the space between your nose and your lips, which he referred to in some promotional material as the mustache area. And then afterwards, days 4 through 9, you expand your concentration to understand the objective reality around you, the Satya, the truth. Then finally, on the last day, day 10, you do what's called Maitri Sadhana, where you focus on creating or fostering peace and friendliness towards all living beings, a very Jain way to end the meditation practices. But that is not the only place where you can find the impact of Sri Puja Jimchandra Suriji. He actually has followings in different parts of India, one of the most notable of which is Azimganj, about 200 kilometers away from Kolkata. So I took an overnight trip there. Here it is. It's on the banks of the river Ganges, and I had the pleasure of being led around town by my friend Jyoti Kotari from Jaipur. He grew up and was raised. He was born and raised in Azimganj, and so he was able to point out, yes, in this house there was a Yeti, in that place there was a group of Yetis staying there. And so, for example, you have this FISHL, which is a sort of a congregation place. It's in a dilapidated state, but at a certain point, Jyoti told me, when you walk by this FISHL, you could see, you could hear Yatis playing musical instruments. So you would often hear them playing the flute. I think that's what he said. But not only was there a historical impact or a historic impact on Azimganj, but you could really get a sense of the Yeti tradition as a living tradition. So in people's homes, they had pictures of their families with the Sri Puja. Here's Sri Puja Jin Chandra Suri, who we just met, as a younger man. In their offices, they had calendars from the main center in Nal, near Bikaner, in Rajasthan. And then one of his major gadis is here. It's the example that I showed before at the beginning. So you can see you have portraits of the Sri Puja as a younger man, and then you have his predecessor, Sri Puja Jin Vijayendra Suri, and then you have other monks who are not Yatis, some nuns, and then other pictures of other Yatis from his lineage. So this place was really amazing for my research. I got a lot of materials from this place, and the first of which is, we can just quickly look at an interesting financial note. So there's Jyoti. He's doing his own historical project about his hometown. And we were able to get, or he was able to get, access to the Gadi documents and the temple documents. So we actually got to look at their rosters and their account books. So here's a modern one. And it's a little blurry, so I apologize for that. But if you could see, you'd be able to see a section of the roster that is designated for the portion of each donation that Yetis who were staying at that Gadi were entitled to. So when you have several families who were, making daily small donations for their daily rituals, and then of course larger donations for larger festivals and things like that, it actually builds up. And Jyoti confirms for me that some of these Yatis actually got so rich that they were able to establish small lending institutions, which again, for a tradition whose monks are ideally not supposed to handle money at all, is a pretty interesting thing, I think. But the other aspect that you could really feel in Azimganj was the Yati and Sri Puja's connection to magical, medicinal, and miraculous practices and powers. So I'm going to give you two examples here. The first is over what is called a tabiz, which is basically it's a charm. It's a metal encasing, which is then stuffed with a scroll that has a mantra written on it. And this is not a particularly Jain thing. Many religious communities throughout India use these tabiz or other similar charms. Whether you're a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Jain or a Muslim, you might find members of those communities wearing or using tabiz. So here is a non-Jain resident of Azimganj, and this is hers. But Yatis and Sri Pujas, at least in Azimganj, were very much associated with these practices, with the making of tabizes. So much so that when I was doing an interview with some of the community members at the Gadi, a woman came up to us and asked, who is this guy? What is he doing here? And they explained, he's studying the Yati tradition, he's studying Sri Pujas, and she took that to mean, he's learning how to make tabizes. And she asked me how to make a tabiz, which of course I don't know how to do yet. But the other interesting aspect, or the other interesting find from Azimganj, is this diary this notebook from the last Sri Puja to live in Azimganj. And it's about 200 pages, and it's filled with instructions on how to create mantras and yantras. So I'm just going to scroll through these because I think they're pretty interesting to look at. And so Jyoti read this he kind of skimmed through some of the pages, and he told me what was in it, and I also read a little bit about through it. So you'd use these, some of these mantras were used just for special holidays, like perhaps Diwali. But some of them were used to cure things like malaria, and there was instructions on how to make a charm which cures malaria. Now, I should say here that when I showed this to Dr. Flügel, we had quite a bit of a discussion about, well, what makes this Jain? Is this Jain at all? And, well, I'm going to have to actually go through the book itself before I can give a better answer. But what we do know is that, one, it belonged to the last living Yati, the last Yati to live in Azimganj. And from the stamp at the front of the book, we can tell that he got it from the library of another Yati from Baroda in Gujarat, which is, again, on the other side of the country. But this is not at all strange to find a Yeti in possession of a book like this. And to illustrate that, we'll go, again, let's go to Gujarat now, to a very small town. Actually, it's more of a village. It's got a population of about 1,000 people. It's a couple hours away from Ahmedabad, and it's called Lavana. And the reason why it's important is this Yati named Yati Fulchandji. Here he is. And Fulchandji established for himself an independent gadi in his home very recently, right before or around the time that he died, unfortunately. Yeah, so you can see it's a bit more humble than the other ones that we saw. Again, it's just in his home. Here's the attendant, Himanshuji. Here's some pictures, some articles from the Yati's possessions, and then we have a small throne or small gadi there. The reason why it's important is because it contains a library of several hundreds or perhaps thousands, as was reported to me, books dealing with astrology, with mantra making, with Ayurvedic medical practices, and so forth. And Himanshu, the attendant, confirmed for me that it was still in use, and sadhus come by all the time to use this library and borrow a book and read its contents, including, he confirmed this as well, occasionally Digambar monks from the other sectarian tradition of Jainism. The other reason why this is important, or is, well, it has to do with the attendant, who is not just the attendant, Himanshuji. He is also Fulchandji's biological son. So there's Yati Fulchandji, and there is Himanshuji, and they're doing a puja, I believe, outside of Parlitana, this major Jain pilgrimage site in Gujarat. And Fulchandji, he actually had 6 biological children. Now, the reason why I bring them up is not just, because, oh, look, this monk has children, but this family is actually quite important because they helped to organize this yearly meeting of 400 different families, which all claim to be biologically descended from different Yatis. So much so that they have conceived of themselves as 4 distinct gotras, which it gets a little complicated what a gotra is or how it works, but very roughly and quickly, a gotra is a kinship group that essentially you're not supposed to marry inside your gotra. You're supposed to marry outside of your gotra because your gotra is your sort of your extended family. So again, this is an ongoing project, so I definitely have to confirm this. I wasn't able to go to this event where all these families meet because of coronavirus, but I definitely will go. We'll be back. But yeah, so beyond this, I don't know too much about it, but I do had their family as sort of a case study. So he had 6 children, one of which was unmarried, one of which was married to an Oswal, so a Jain from another clan. And then one of them had a love marriage. And then the other 3, they're Gorgis. They're Gorgis. And the other 3 were married to Yati and Mahatma families. So I wanted to end on that note, just to see the full impact and the full scope of the Yati tradition in Jainism as it stands today. You have these powerful monastic lineages that extended from Kolkata to Jaipur, based in Lucknow, that are still, even though they're extinct, they're still very much venerated in their monastic community, or sorry, in the lay community that they attended to. You have places where there's quite a vibrant living tradition, and then you also have families that claim to be derived, biologically descended from Yatis. So with that, I guess we can move to the next portion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eric. That was absolutely fabulous. Maybe you could stop sharing so we can see the
Oh, yes. Yes, yes. Hello.
There were quite a lot of questions to your presentation. Yes, and I took notes, and we got commendations. David White says an excellent presentation. So you have a very distinguished audience. And
that's my he advised me back in UCSB where I did my undergrad, for anyone who doesn't know that is. Oh, my friend David.
One of the issues which became very clear is that I'm saying this for the audience which isn't familiar with the Jain tradition, how important sectarianism is in Jainism. There are numerous sects, many of which have been have died out, like some which Eric talked about, and that is a misconception, I think, in the so-called West, that a state-organized religion is the standard form, and sects are something really disturbing, chaotic. But actually, I would say 99% of all religious movements have in the form of sects. So it's the natural form almost of religion. And Eric's work here is looking at a particular set of lineages which was very powerful for 100 or more years, then started to lose track because reformist Jains, so-called Orthodox monks took over. And so there's hardly any documentation of this tradition. So Eric's work is really, really important to trace down the last remnants of particular segment of this important tradition, which helped Jainism survive. There were some very dire years, at the end of the Muslim rule and up to the beginning of the 19th century under the British. Interestingly enough, Jainism recovered, but it was very close to collapsing the monastic system. And in comparative religion terms, it's a very, very important work. So a number of questions came clearly from Jains witnessing this. They know, of course, the subtle differences, but the recurring question was, are all Yatis male? Eric, can you?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. No, there are Yatinis. Now, the records of Yatinis are even, at least from what I've seen, are even more scant than the records for Yatis. But I will say that there are, I did meet a Yati Sadhvi in Delhi, or I guess I got her phone number and we talked on the phone. But And when I said that Shri Puja Jimchandra Suri is initiating more disciples, well, he actually has plans to initiate a Yatini into his lineage. So she was meditating when I went to the meditation center, so I didn't disturb her. But yeah, that's definitely within the plans. There definitely were, and there still are a few, 2, 1.5.
Related question. What about marriage? Is it opportune to be married? I mean, I have to add to this, it is not uncommon for, let me say, a standard Jain monks to take full vows and so on, to have children. It depends on the time of initiation. So
right.
You may take the vows, you know, at an older age, and then take on a religious role. Like Rishabha, the famous Jina, who was a king first and then became the first Tirthankara according to Jain mythology, with many, many sons and daughters.
Yeah. So there are, of course, there are sadhus who were householders before, they had families, they had children, and then they go and they renounce the world, so they renounce their family. But some yatis continued to be married, or they would get married after their vows, and they would live with their families. And like I said, Yati Fulchandji, you know, he had children, and he was still a practicing ascetic. He lived in his house. He had his wife there, and yeah.
So that is an exciting area for research. As we know, there are many Buddhist monks in Japan, etc., who are married and still call themselves monks, which seems to be counterintuitive. And there's a whole set of questions related to these intermediary categories between fully initiated mendicants and householders, which, interestingly enough, if they want to call themselves Jain householders, have to take vows as well. So most Jains don't do that. They can just be called followers, in a sense, the technique.
Right.
But the questions were very specific. There's a category called Bhattaraks.
Yeah.
Can they be compared to the Bhattaraks? Can they be compared to the Samanis of the Therapanthis? So these are different categories. So what is your answer to these questions?
So they're definitely in this kind of broader term of semi-renouncer. So Bhattaraks are an analogous semi-renouncer from the Digambara tradition. And as I mentioned before, the Digambaras are the ones who don't wear any clothing once they fully renounce. But Bhattarakas did wear, they wore orange robes. They are very similar to Sri Puja's, and there are still Bhattarakas in the south, and there were Bhattarakas in the north and in central India. And at one time, like I said, the dominant monastic class of Śvetāmbara Jainism were the Yatis, and the dominant monastic class in Digambara Jainism were the Bhattaraks. Now, I would still have to, do more historic research as to how this actually took shape. I don't know if there were as many Bhattaraks as there were Yatis. I can't really speak much on that in that direction. They are very similar to, and Bhattaraks nowadays, the ones who are in the south, they very often go to the United States, and they'll go to Chicago and New Jersey and the Bay Area and Southern California, where you have these larger Jain communities. And I've met some who have done that. So in that sense, they are very similar, as well as to the Sramanis in Therapanthi Jainism. But, well, like I said, it's an ongoing project, so I can't really answer much more than that. But yes, they are analogous. They are similar. They do have similar functions, and they did have similar functions historically. So in that sense, yes.
Indeed. Another question also related to this. There is a group of sects or movements, Jain movements, that follow Raichand, Srimad Raja Chandra.
Yes.
And they're very, very popular in the US and in the West in general, but also in India, of course. Would you compare those classes of religious virtuosi with the Yatis? Where are the similarities and differences?
Oh, honestly, I don't know too much about the Sri Ramchandra movement to really make a statement about that. I know, yeah, I don't know. Maybe you could do that, Dr. Flügel.
I can answer it. Yes, I mean, what is interesting about the Yatis, they do take vows, and to be married is unusual. I mean, for the Bhattaraks as well, they're fully fledged renunciants, but they have vows that are not as strict as the vows of full monks and nuns, fully initiated monks and nuns, which allow them to travel, use public transport, and what you said. Whereas the followers of Srimad Raja Chandra and similar people like Kanji Swami, we have a project on Kanji Swami, hopefully starting here at SOAS, while you're starting as well, would be very exciting.
Oh, great.
These are lay people, fully fledged lay people. They don't take any vows, but it's a spiritual form of religiosity. But some gradations are recognized in not so obvious ways, because we don't want to go into this. Another, and you see how broad the field of Jain studies is, another question related to a sect. Are there any Sthanakavasis that can be, are Sthanakavasis Yatis?
I don't know. Do you know of any Sthanakavasis Yatis? I mean, there were Lokagat Yatis, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These were sometimes mixed up with the Sthanakavasis. These are basically broad movement of Jain mendicant traditions that reject image worship, because it involves violence. Flowers are broken, the earth is dug up, and the worms are killed when the temples are built, and money is involved, and so on. So that reform movement started in the 15th century, and by a lay person, interestingly enough. But the first institutionalized ascetic was a proper monk. And they're called the Lonka tradition, which in a similar way as the groups which you described declined. So that nowadays, no Yati is left. I mean, there were monks, and then there became Yatis, i.e. monks who didn't follow the rules as strict as is described in the scriptures, but to some extent, and therefore they are venerated. So there is a similar tradition, but the Sthanakavasis split off the Lonkagat. There are some 30 traditions, and they are all properly initiated mendicants. So the answer is no, but they came out of a tradition which developed something very, very similar. So you see that there's so much interesting material, and that needs to be studied. It is really absolutely fascinating. So let me ask more questions here. The question is asked, is there how to compare these Jain principles with Buddhist principles, especially Vipassana? This relates to meditation, I suppose.
Yeah. So I'm guessing this person who asked this question brought up Vipassana because the meditation practice that I described, the Satya Sadhna, it starts off with breathing, focusing on this space right here, and then expanding your awareness, and that basically, from my understanding at least, that is very similar to Vipassana, the Vipassana meditation tradition in Buddhism. So yeah, I mean, I also went there. My mind also went there when I saw this list But I haven't seen it, I haven't done it. So beyond that, I can't say.
What about the history of the Yati tradition? How old is it? And why was a reform movement started under the Raj, under British colonial rule?
Yeah, oh, okay, yeah, this is an interesting question. I don't know when the first Yati ever came into existence. Now, there's other classes of semi-renunciants in the Jain tradition that precede the Yatis. So there's this group called the Chaityavasis, literally the temple dwellers. Those were reformed out, and every time you see any reference to both of them, they're often called, Yatis are often called like mutated Chaityavasis. I don't know if I would say that. I don't know if I'm qualified to say that. Yeah, so as for when the first Yati began, I can't really say that, but I do know that the founder, one of the founders of the Katargach, Jin Chandra Suri, in his life story, it does talk about both Chaityavasis, I believe, and Yatis. So that is, help me with the dates here, but I believe 16th century, maybe. Is it earlier than that, later than that? But as for the question about the end of the Yati tradition, well, one, it's not the end. But why does it correspond with the British Raj, right? So on the one hand, it is very tempting to say that this is sort of a Jain Reformation, like a Jain Protestant Reformation that happened in the last 100 years. It is very tempting to say that because the story is very similar. But like I mentioned, there's a long history of semi-renunciants in the Jain tradition that have been reformed out of the tradition. So there's a long history of this back and forth between, you know, how some Jain scholars, like actually Jain scholars, how they call it, you know, a battle between laxity of vows and the proper vows. That has happened since the beginning of Jainism, really. So, you know, is there like British colonial influence on this? Is there Protestant influence on the decline of the Yatis? Maybe, but it definitely should be noted that this is a longer history of reform and going back and forth between laxity and strictness or strict vows.
Absolutely, very good answers. More questions. Arjit, what do Yatis believe in? Is there anything specific? And what is their function in the society, the Jain society? Is their main purpose or aim to convert people to Jainism or to reform the Brahmanical caste system? You know, a number of questions related to these issues.
Wow. Yeah. But basically, what is the function of a Yati? Essentially, they function just like normal monks would, or normal monks. But they, you know, in the historical records that I've read, so I've been reading the Brihad Itihas of the Katargach, the great history of the Katargach, and it shows the leaders of the lineages and sub-lineages of the Katargach. And unless it's labeled as, unless a particular leader of the Katargach is labeled as a Sri Puja, you really wouldn't be able to tell the difference, at least in their conduct. So you have Yatis and Sri Pujas who consecrated idols or icons. They renovated temples. They led pilgrimages, and that's exactly what the you know, the strict vowed monks were doing. So functionally, there wasn't that much of a difference, with the exception that they could do, or they often did, many, or I should say, a larger variety of ritual practices. Including, like I said, these sort of magical, or maybe a better term, like occult sciences or things like that. Yeah, and then on the other hand, they also were able to manage wealth, manage property, handle money. So they did have a bit of an impact on local economies. They were able to travel along with merchants groups and with pilgrimage groups and establish new Jain communities. And so, I mean, they had multiple functions, and there were many Yatis and Sripujas who were very close to different royal families throughout India, even during the Mughal period. So there are many different functions of a Yati. One thing to keep in mind about Yatis is that there's, at least, again, as it was reported to me by a, well, I won't say who it was, but, oh, Jesus, what was I saying? Sorry. But yeah, so there's no textual basis, at least in the, like the original scriptures of Jainism. There's no description as to what a Yeti, as I have described it, is. Now, this term Yeti is used, but it's just interchangeable with the word sadhu or muni or any of these number of terms that refer to a monk. But there isn't a blueprint for what a Yeti is. It's just what Śvetāmburs might call an ascetic or a monastic individual who doesn't follow these rules and who travels by mechanized vehicle. And I think the mechanized vehicle aspect is probably what people point to say, yes, that's a Yeti, rather than just a monk who's not following the rules or something like that.
Yes, very good. It's amazing how much knowledge you have already amassed. Like straight away a PhD, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, for everyone who's listening, we should appreciate the hardship that Eric is enduring. He's in India due to Corona. He's basically stuck there.
Yeah, waiting on medical clearance. Yeah.
You can't travel to all these wonderful Yati places at the moment.
Yeah, it really cut into my research. But as you can see, I got a lot of things, and that wasn't even everything that I got.
Yes. So I've just been told by Bharti here through the chat that maybe one last question, and then she would like to talk about the Friends of SOAS. And my question to you was, what are your plans? Obviously, you're on a research track. You're not doing a standard MA and then do something else, go to the city of London or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, my medium and long-term plans. Well, one, I will finally get medical clearance and go to London. I will continue with this project studying colonial documents that are housed in the British Library, in the SOAS Library, and so forth. Finish my master's. I'm hoping I will be applying for a Fulbright fellowship. Who knows if I'll get it, but it would be really nice to be able to do this for an entire year and get really dive deep into this. And then afterwards, I would like to complete a PhD dissertation. I'm really looking at Emory University. But yeah, long term, I want to get a PhD, study Jainism, study things like this, and then eventually go on and teach in religious studies departments or South Asian studies departments. Yeah, that's the plan.
Absolutely fantastic. So Eric is a rare specimen. There are very few young people who dedicate their life to this field of study. Unfortunately, in the Jain community itself, I hardly know anyone, but of course, in future, I hope there will be a greater dynamic in this field in the community as well. So I hand over to Bharti, right? Or who wants to take over? Greg.
Hi, I'll take over. Thank you so much. Yeah, just thank you both for that really insightful and interesting discussion. On behalf of our entire AFSOAS Board of Directors and the SOAS alumni community here in the US, I, of course, would like to extend our sincerest thanks to Dr. Flügel, Chair of the Centre of Jaina Studies at SOAS, University of London. Also, a very hearty thanks to Eric Villalobos for your amazing presentation, your clear passion for this subject. We're thrilled that you're our recipient of the John Loiello AFSOAS FISHL Scholarship for this academic year. And it's clear that you're going to make the most of this opportunity. And yeah, just can't wait to see what you do in the future. What's sure to be a very bright and prestigious academic career. As always, I want to thank our AFSOAS Vice President, Dr. Bharti Kansara, for organizing yet another engaging virtual event for our alumni and friends. To quickly share with you all a little bit about our organization, the American Friends of SOAS, or AFSOAS as we're known, is a nonprofit organization founded by SOAS alumni based in the United States, which aims to develop a professional, academic, career, and social network for the more than 3,500 SOAS alumni here in the US, thereby creating a linkage in the process between SOAS and its American alumni and friends. AFSOAS shares and promotes SOAS's educational aims of advancing the study of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and supports projects and activities which meet these aims. AFSOAS also encourages American students to study at SOAS. We enable postgraduate scholarships for American students, and we help to channel charitable giving to the university. Since 2012, we have helped to channel over $1 million, well over $1 million, in support for various departments at SOAS, including the Centre of Jaina Studies, various scholarship programs, other academic studies, and even some global relief efforts. Our flagship program, which is the John Loiello AFSOAS FISHL Scholarship, was established by AFSOAS in memory of John Loiello, a founding board member and benefactor of AFSOAS, who sadly passed away in 2013. The purpose of this scholarship is to give one American student the life-changing opportunity to study a full-time, one-year top master's program at SOAS in London. To date, we have had 7 recipients, of which Eric is our most recent. We would so appreciate your support of this initiative if you're willing and able to make a contribution. I added in the comment box a link where you can make your tax-deductible contribution. So if you did enjoy today's talk, we'd really appreciate your support. Alternatively, you can earmark a gift to the Centre of Jaina Studies if you prefer. As Dr. Flügel mentioned, the aim of the Centre of Jaina Studies is to promote the study of Jaina religion and culture by providing an interdisciplinary platform for academic research, teaching, and publication in the field of Jaina studies. And I'm sure he would also be very grateful for your support. And finally, I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to thank you for your interest in this subject, for your interest in academic research and discussion in general, and most importantly, just for making the time to be with us today. So thank you all so much. We really enjoyed this talk, and yeah, we're just blown away by what you presented, Eric, and just can't wait to see what's next. So thank you all. Have a good day.